The voice of sharing. 旅人ASEAN.
We are back on the ASEAN Breakfast Call. Right now is the dialogue on the media freedom in Malaysia. We have here Terence Fernandez, Managing Editor of FZAC.com. Hi.
Hi, Arlene. Hello, everybody.
Hi. So today you are going to talk about media freedom. What is the current state of media freedom in this country?
Yes, what is the current state of media freedom? Why don't we jump into it? There is progress. Definitely there's progress. I see that, probably because reporters are a lot bolder, especially the online news portals. And we live in a seamless world. And what you don't get in Malaysia, you can just turn on to CNN and the foreign news cables, as we have witnessed during the MH370 crisis, to get alternative news. But having said that, there are also efforts from within the government, within the administration, within the political party. Not the government per se, probably, but there are elements which are worried about this growing enthusiasm by media practitioners to practice and advocate a free press.
I see. So how much of the media has evolved in terms of adapting to the current political scenario in this country since independence until now? I'm sure there's several stages of, that the media has to adapt to.
Well, if you're talking about independent, you're going all the way back to 1957. There was not so much that, in terms of dissemination of news, it was very limited. Pre-independence, what the Malayans or the locals were to get in the sense of news was maybe from radio programs which are catered for them by the British rulers, and even the dissemination of information, negative information against the British rulers were also curtailed. So even back in those days as well, there was a lot of repression on the press. But I think following independence, I think the late Tunku Abdul Rahman and certainly some of his successors did advocate free press. But you must understand, during those times, the need was very different. At that time, it was about nation building. At that time, it was about growing the economy. At the time, it was about enhancing national unity between the three races, and then slowly, as the country became more progressive, then the needs for free press, the type of journalism that people expect, also varies, also grows.
So, but in which particular era that free press were particularly curtailed to the extent that it was significant for government to stop any publication that they felt is threatening their legitimacy?
Okay, if you go back to post-May 13th, when the National Security Council was formed with Tunku Abdul Razak, there was a proper. There were instructions that the press, and those days everything was mainstream press anyway, that the press,
there's no such thing as online press.
Yeah, that's right. Or alternative press per se, the press was asked to perform its national duty, its civic duty, do national service, and not flame, not fan any flames of racial discord, and assist the government, assist the council to in its efforts to improve national unity, national security, and to get the mindset of the Malays, the Chinese, and the Indians out of the fires of May 13th. But of course, as the country progressed, and we came out of that, as the country progressed and became more developed, there were other areas that the press were expected to focus on. Issues such, apart from nation building at that time, was issues about education, our educational policies, our improving the civil service. We were expected to comment and critique, and those were meant to be constructive criticisms to help enhance the public delivery system. People didn't have any avenue to complain those days, so the only way they could express their grouses was through the newspapers. You see, so the newspaper became an organ for the rakyat, for the citizens, to convey the dissatisfaction of the people to the government, whether it's via news reports or publishing letters to the editor, or even conveying it personally, because the press has access to the decision makers, to convey it personally, one-on-one, when we meet these people who are in power.
I see, interesting. But I think it was during Mahathir's time where, especially through Operasi Lalang and all that.
I was waiting for you to say it.
Yeah, I have to say that where the media was definitely being threatened, directly in terms of how they do their reporting. So, what was the situation back then?
Okay, when Mahathir came on board, with all due respect to Dr. M, he dismantled a lot of our institutions, and that is my opinion, and I think that's the opinion of a lot of people. And I think even if you look at the facts, the monarchy, the judiciary, and definitely the press, it was during Mahathir's time that we achieved the most in terms of development, but also we had to compromise, or rather, the government thought there was a need to compromise all these other institutions for the sake of bringing Malaysia forward the way they wanted it to. So criticisms were seen as shackles, as holding back the national aspiration of reaching economic prosperity and reaching a developed nation status. But what we were criticizing the government about is that we are all on board when it comes to economic prosperity and improving the lot of the people. But the problem with Mahathir or Mahathir's administration was that there was a lot of corruption. Corruption that you see today stemmed from the Mahathir administration. I'm not saying Mahathir is corrupt. Please, I'm not saying that. With all due respect to him and regard to what he has done for this country, I don't think economically the country would have achieved so much under his watch. But of course, because of the policies that he introduced, also on the flip side, the irony is that we could have achieved a lot more. So these were some of the criticisms that were going about, not also by the press, but also by the opposition, for instance, and the NGO, civil society, who were criticizing the government of the day for some of the policies that were introduced. And some of the policies are actually, I'm sorry, I know I'm digressing here, but just to put things into perspective, some of the policies were actually good. the intention was good. But as they say, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. What Mahathir wanted to do was create maybe 100 multimillionaires, and those 100 multimillionaires were meant. Each of them was supposed to create an additional 100 multimillionaires. But unfortunately, the 100 multimillionaires wanted to be 100 billionaires, and so during Mahathir's era, there was a lot of business was coming to Malaysia, and we were sidestepping a lot of a lot of procedures, circumventing tender processes. There were very questionable contracts given to questionable individuals and organizations, people with no experience, for instance, or no capital. So when these questions were being asked, and the criticisms against some of these policies, some of the government decisions were becoming more acute, and to the point where it was impacting the ruling party at the polls, that was when the Mahathir administration decided to pull the reins on dissent and on criticism. So it was very difficult at that point to criticize. I'll give you one example. When I was working in the Malay Mail in the late 1990s, I was manning the hotline desk. All right, I was manning the hotline desk, where we received complaints from the public on lax services at government departments, for instance, or poor services from a private entity like a bank, for instance. We had a lot of complaints on Proton.
I see.
All right, we had lots of complaints on Proton, but we were instructed not to publish any of those complaints, but to just pass it over to Proton, because we had to perform our civic duty in supporting the national automotive policy and the national car. So all complaints on Proton were not allowed to be published. Well, just one example, you see, and so these are just an example of some of the things that we had to go through in keeping quiet on being asked to be silent on certain issues. I'm all for supporting the government if it's good, the government policies if they are good, if they are beneficial. But at the same time, the press must be allowed to criticize when they see something is not right.
And also the Printing Presses and Publication Act was amended in 1984 during Mahathir's time. So
Yes.
what was added? What was being further restricted?
Honestly, it's so early in the day, and I can't think. I can't think right now. I should have brought my notes. But we were not allowed to have a regular print license, like in the way you would understand print license to be awarded, to be given, to be issued. They give you a print. They give you a license today, and at the end of the year, you have to go and get it renewed. Which means for the entire year, you got to toe the line. You got to behave yourself, because at the end of the year, if they decide that you have been naughty, they might decide not to renew your license, and you're screwed.
So it's being renewed. It has to be renewed every year.
It has to be renewed every year. I remember when I was in the Sun between 1999 and 2011, there were instances where our licenses were only renewed on the very last day. December 31st, and you keep us on our toes, keep us at the edge of our seat, and then just before the 24-hour deadline, you call them and say, okay, come and renew your license. So that is how they control you. That is how they keep you in line. And that is what keeps our editors and media owners awake at night. Will my license be renewed in December? You know, if it's not renewed, what do I do in January? I've got salaries to pay. I've got bills to take care of. I've got advertisers' commitments to honor. What do I do? So, the Printing and Presses Act is I would say the biggest shackle for print media today.
For the news reporting, let's focus on the mainstream news first. So all this mainstream printing news, printing press, how do they practice in their day-to-day reporting? Do they practice self-censorship, or do they wait for the government to call them in saying that we don't accept this kind of reporting?
Sorry, can you repeat the question? Sorry about that.
So when it comes to the mainstream news, printing news, there's a fine balance between, reporting what is happening and censoring what is,
self-censorship you're talking about.
Yeah, what is acceptable. In terms of editors, what editors in the mainstream newspaper, probably maybe in the English ones, do they,
practice self-censorship?
Practice self-censorship, or do they try to sort of challenge the government in a bit, go to the edge a bit?
There are editors who practice self-censorship because they look at the bigger picture. There are editors who feel that a particular report, say for instance a report on racial clash, a clash between two communities, will not be beneficial to the public at large. So they perform their role as editors to practice responsible journalism in their mind. That they say, if you were to run this report, it's going to fan more flames. There's going to be a bigger fight after people read this. All right. But there are also editors who feel, if I run this report, will I be hauled up by the Home Ministry? Will I be accused or cited for sedition? Because that report, like I said earlier, can fan flames. So these are the dilemmas that they have to struggle with. But honestly, I can tell you, in my observation, a lot of the so-called self-censorship is because of what we discussed earlier. They're just afraid of what the government might say, and if that would impact on the renewal of their permit.
I see.
You see.
Other than in terms of renewal of permit, what are the threats that reporters and journalists and editors face in terms of how they should do the reporting?
Well, there's also, it's not just the government who exerts pressure. Your advertisers exert pressure. If we were talking about Proton earlier, I'm not saying they did that. I'm just using this as I'm using an example, a hypothetical situation. If you run a bad report on our cars, say there's a flaw in the brake system, for example, and if you report it extensively, we might pull out our ads. I'm not, so editors have to move around very gingerly when it comes to advertisers and potential advertisers. But I always say, at the end of the day, we got to stay true to ourselves. And I'm happy to also note that the current batch of people who are involved in advertising have a very high regard for free press and independent journalism. And they get angry, but they don't use it as a carrot or a stick to threaten us. What they do expect is some regard, that we let them know in advance that there is this potential problem, and it is our duty as a newspaper, as a news organization, to run that story. But look, we are letting you know first, so you can so you are well prepared to give us a response. At the end of the day, you must give people the right to respond, and more often than not, when you give them the right to reply, which is a basic journalism tenet, they would be happy with that.
Okay, we will continue again in a few minutes talking more on the online media,
Sure.
how it has actually evolved the media freedom environment in this country.
The voice of sharing. Durian
We are back again with Terence Fernandez, Managing Editor of APZAC.com. We will continue on the media laws that we have in Malaysia. And one of it is the Printing Presses and Publication Act. I mentioned earlier the one amended on the 1984, but the one amended on the 2012, what it carried?
You see, the amendment, Arlene, of the 2012 PPPA, Printing Presses and Publications Act, is part of the Prime Minister's attempts at reforms, abolishing the ISA, for instance, and also introducing amendments to the PPPA, Freedom of Assembly Act as well. All flawed, but the intention is there, so due regard to the Prime Minister for that. But the PPPA amendment, in every sense of the word, is just a cosmetic exercise.
I see.
It's a cosmetic exercise. You remove the need to have your permit renewed annually, so you're not sitting at the edge of your seat anymore, right? Wrong, because the government still holds the discretion to revoke your license at any time.
Anytime.
At any time. And the decision is final.
Any cases that happened right after the 2012 Printing Press and Publication Act was amended? I think a few, the heat was suspended.
The heat was suspended. Many say it's because of certain articles that they had front page on the country's leader and his spouse. Spending habits, I think that was what the story was about. But in actual fact, the reason given by the Home Ministry, if not mistaken, was that it did not use its license accordingly. It was a business license, but they were running regular news stories. If memory serves me well, that was what the reason was. But they were suspended for about a month, and the Heat had written a lot of letters to them, and also showed a lot of documentary evidence that they had in fact did comply with all the regulations. So it was either a case of victimization, or clear victimization, or a case of left hand don't know what the right hand is doing at the Ministry of Home Affairs. But they were allowed to continue after about a month. I wouldn't be doing justice to my news portal if I don't bring up FZ.com. FZ.com was launched 2 years ago, and we had applied for our print license, which was approved, and then deferred, and then revoked.
There's a lot of work happening in between.
Yeah, you see a lot happened in between, and we had actually gone to the High Court to file for judicial review. Now, February 5th, in the morning of February 5th, we received judgment in our favor. The court granted us leave, granted FZ.com leave to go ahead and challenge the Home Ministry's refusal to grant us a full license. On the evening of February 5th, we received a letter from the Home Ministry saying that our license, which was once deferred, has now been revoked indefinitely. So these are the challenges that we are facing. And don't forget Malaysia Kini, our brother in arms, Malaysia Kini, was also attempting to get its own print license, but
Until now, it's not successful.
has not been granted. They also went for judicial review, and also the court also found in their favor. And what does the Home Minister say about this? He goes to Parliament in his written answer to a Barisan National Member of Parliament, I can't remember his name, during Q&A, during the question and answer session. He said, we did not approve print license for FZ.com and Malaysia Kini because these two news portals have a tendency of running sensational and controversial news.
So with the Printing Act, the 2012 amended ones, the Home Ministry can simply choose which media that they want to be the printing media,
Yes.
in which they say that you are not eligible to do so.
I mean, I'll be very frank here. Look at Utusan Malaysia. Look at the kind of inflammatory stuff that they write. And they've lost all their legal suits. Lim Guan Eng has sued them so many times, I think, and Guan Eng just won another suit 2 weeks ago. So the very fact that even the courts seem to think that they write defamatory articles, meaning untruth, goes to show that something's not that there is an acknowledgement from society, from the courts, that something's not right with Utusan Malaysia. But yet because they are the organ of the ruling party, they are allowed to thrive.
Is there in any way that Utusan has been, called by the government for printing anything that the government do not favor?
We have been told that they were hauled up. I mean, we are told by the Home Ministry officials. I think Home Minister mentioned that they were summoned for some of the articles, especially the articles which were deemed as inflammatory, issues on the Chinese, issues on the Christians. They were called up. But when you say called up to do what? Sit down and have coffee. I've been called up. I know how these things work. I've been called up. Why do you, by the Home Ministry, on certain articles when in the past? Why do you write this? What's this about? What is your new newspaper about? If more of it is a fact-finding mission.
So it seems like the media freedom for other medias are being curtailed, but at the same time, media spinning is being encouraged, especially among the mainstream media newspapers.
You hit the nail on the head. Yes, media spinning. Yes. Look, you're talking about mainstream press, right? The fact is that the main newspapers are owned by political parties, the ruling political party. And they have to abide by what the master says. And they have to perform their responsibility as an entity of the government or the party to publish news that are favorable to the government of the day. But I can see a trend in some of the newspapers which are trying to move away from being a political organ. I think, with all due respect, I think the Star, you can see they have attempted to steer themselves away from being an MCA paper. Of course, yesterday's front page doesn't really help, but they need, they have their responsibilities to their political masters, to their shareholder.
But at the same time, the sales also counts, isn't it? Because people would boycott a newspaper if it doesn't really serve, as a real news
Exactly.
news making I mean, it's a real news source for the people to read.
Which is why a lot of news organizations are going online, because we feel that there's a lot more freedom in cyberspace, in online. And to be fair to the Malaysian Multimedia Commission, they have been actually quite good to us, in the sense that they have not curtailed us or come down on the press for some of our articles. I mean, as far as FZ is concerned, I never had any issues with the MCMC.
Ever since, I think Malaysia Kini was one of the first in terms of being an online media.
Yeah, it's the first.
Yeah, it is the first. But ever since then, they were mushrooming of online media news portal. But how has it been sustainable to these news portals? Maybe in particular FZ.
Whether there's money coming in? Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, people look at your hits, look at your page views, and if the numbers are there, the advertisers will come in. I do acknowledge that because that some news portals which are seen as overly controversial, overly critical, this is their opinion, overly critical, tend to spook certain potential advertisers, especially advertisers who rely a lot on the government of the day for their business. What would the government say if I were to put my ads in this news portal? Would they come after me? You see, but at the end of the day, and this applies to both the mainstream print, which is print broadcast, and also online. At the end of the day, you write fairly, you write without an agenda. Your agenda, if you have any, should be for a better society and for the public interest, not as an organ for a politician or a political party, irrespective of which side you come from. Because don't forget, even the news portals, some of the news portals are accused of being the mouthpiece of the opposition. You see, and sometimes it's very glaring when the opposition party does something or says something which is not in the public interest. For instance, the debate or the reports on some of the news portals, which are supposed to be free, fair, and independent, are very toned down. You see, so that also is not right. Your responsibility is to the public, to your readers. And Arlene, you mentioned something earlier about that, if readers don't like what you write, they're not going to bother going to your website or subscribe. And at the end of the day, yes, news is a business. You got to make it sustainable. Whether you're a newspaper or a news portal, you have to draw in your readers. You have to give them you have to give the advertisers the eyeballs, so to speak. I had this conversation with a tycoon some time ago, and I told him, "Sir, this paper does not belong to you." And then he says, "What?" I said, "This paper does not belong to you." And then, "What are you talking about?" I said, "I spent so much money on this newspaper, and I lost so much money as well. And how can you say this paper does not belong to me?" And then I said, "Sir, this paper does not belong to you. It belongs to the people. It belongs to the public. You are holding this paper in trust for the public, because this paper is the voice of the people, the voice of the public." You see, so you must comprehend your civic duty.
In fact, it's a global phenomena where large media companies being owned by very rich and powerful people.
Yes.
And it's not just in Malaysia where it is being owned by either individuals or government, but also in other countries. But so what is the future actually for the media industry? Maybe not just in Malaysia, but globally as well. how can people like us, laymen, really trust the media and hold media accountable on what is being reported?
Don't rely on just one source.
Mm-hmm.
We live in a world where we have access to so much of information overload. But then again, that comes with the other problem that we have to filter and decipher the information that we receive and compare that against what everybody else is saying. The fact that we have access to so many resources on a similar issue makes us better informed.
Mm-hmm.
And people are a lot more educated. People are a lot more critical these days. They don't take everything at face value.
Mm-hmm.
So the media has to keep up with the current trend. Our readers are not just going to lap up everything that you regurgitate. They ask questions. I mean, we get lots of comments and queries from our readers asking us, are you sure this is what was said? Because he said something else in the National News Agency, for instance. So we have to be on our toes as well. And you're talking earlier about a lot of tycoons, business people wanting to own newspapers and news organizations. Owning a media organization is equivalent to power, and you get to influence decisions and even policies. If you have a big organization with a large number of readers, you would be called upon to give your 2 cents worth to be a thought mover, a thought shaper, and also influence policies. And you can even use your influence to damage the reputation of your of your enemies.
That's true.
I'll give you an example. I interviewed the outgoing Prime Minister Tun Abdullah Ahmad Badawi when a couple of months before he stepped down. I think it was in 2008 after the elections. And I was with the Sun at that time, and I asked, he wanted to talk to us about the proposed Malaysian Anti-Corruption Commission bill, which he wanted to introduce into law. That was the last thing he wanted to do before he stepped down. So we asked his people. I said, why did you choose to talk to us about the MACC bill? Because he wanted to talk to us about why the bill is good and why it should be supported.
Mm-hmm.
I said, why you want to talk to us, the Sun, when you have access to, other more mainstream platforms? And the response that I got was that I'm told that you are a very influential newspaper and you are a thought shaper and a thought mover of the Malaysian public, and so in my opinion it is better I talk to you than preach to the converted.
Mm-hmm. So being accountable meaning you gain respect even
Yes.
via the government, it says.
Yes, at the end of the day, they acknowledge.
Mm-hmm.
They acknowledge. It's not enough to be just critical. You must have a following. You must have a mass audience, because that is when they get worried. I mean, a lot of other smaller news portals, for instance, and smaller newspapers, radio also, they touch on really sensitive and crucial issues, which unfortunately, because of their size of their audience, because they are new. I mean, one good example during ASEAN. You guys have just been launched. Okay, you're growing your audience base, but the issues that we are talking about are so pertinent and so crucial. But perhaps because we don't have that audience, that mass audience yet, so people don't take us so seriously. But the moment you start getting your audience, you start getting 200,000 listeners a day, for instance, or if you're a news portal, you get 50 million page views a month, or if you're a newspaper, you get 1 million readers a day. That is when they will stop and take note of you. You see. Yeah.
So talking about authorities stop and take note, what about MCMC? Have they been really controlled the internet lately?
Actually, they've been they've been behaving themselves quite well. You know, I don't not remember MCMC. There may have been cases, but honestly, there haven't been any big cases where they have come down hard on bloggers or news portals. I met Datuk Sabri Chik, the minister, a couple of months ago. I had a roundtable discussion with, it was an informal discussion with him and Datuk Kamaruddin Syaraf, the Secretary General of the MCMC, and they said, look, at the end of the day, I'm a supporter of free press, free media. You guys must be open. You know, you must be open to report. But and it is also something which I subscribe to, and all responsible newsmen and women subscribe to, that you report responsibly. Don't write lies. Do your research. You know, don't defame people. Don't be seditious, and make sure it's factual. Because this is what I tell my reporters. As long as it's factually correct, non-defamatory, and non-seditious, I will support you all the way. Just do your research and make sure you write the truth. You see? And don't write with an agenda to screw somebody lah. Your agenda is in the public interest.
So to be as independent as possible.
As independent as possible. But Arlene, I have to also, you know, we're talking about press freedom and all that. I have to also emphasize here that, you know, when we talk about press freedom, we are always talking about being allowed to report freely, being allowed to say our views without any fear of repercussions. Reporters and editors should also, freedom of the press, like, you know, it also means freeing yourself up, reporters and editors, from the shackles of being subordinate, the shackles of being lackadaisical in approaching your work, from the shackles of mediocrity, from the shackles of intimidation. You know, I see that a lot among Asian journalists. They are very scared to ask questions. They're very scared to offend.
Is it cultural, or
yeah,
is it because of government intimidation as well?
One is that, but a lot of it is also cultural. A lot of it is also cultural. That you've been brought up not to be rude. You've been brought up not to be offensive. But I've noticed too many times that when a challenging question is posed to a minister or to somebody at a press conference, instead of backing me up or backing the reporter who posed that question, many of the other journalists, his fellow journalists around him, looks at him with eyes and mouth open. How can you ask that question? that kind of look, you see. And unfortunately, there are also many reporters out there, editors as well, who play the role of apologists to the government. And these include those from the mainstream press, because they report to political masters, they're owned by political parties. But also perhaps the affiliation of the editor or the reporter towards a particular side. You see. So the thing is, you know, you can like that person, you can talk to that person, you know, you can sit down with him and have coffee with him and be his friend, and he can be a good source of information for you. But the day he crosses the line, it is your duty as a journalist to stand up and say, "Sir, I think you're wrong. How can you say? How can you do this?" You see, one good example I would say is, if you contrast what has been going on during the MH370 press conferences, how the foreign press ask questions and how we ask questions. The foreign press they are equipped with a lot of information, a lot of research. We don't do enough research, local journalists. And there's a report in NZ.com today, quoting several local editors at the forum on World Press Freedom Day on this issue, that we don't spend enough time doing research. We
just do our job and then that's it. I mean, just write a report, that's it.
Yeah, I mean, that we don't do enough because the questions that are posed indicates that you don't do enough research. You see, I've been to many press conferences where they are asking very lame questions, very very standard 5, standard 6 kind of questions.
Kind of similar to the Barack Obama's event press conference as well.
Yes, during his town hall meeting. Yes, I
Yeah.
expected so much more from those who
Yeah.
were there. But I think in Barack Obama's case, the town hall meeting, I think people were overwhelmed by his presence. He's a celebrity. He's a rock star. So many people who were there, I will say, looking at the looks, seeing the looks on everyone's faces, I think you were there as well, Arlene.
Yeah, I was there.
You tried to get
But,
you tried to take a selfie with him.
I wasn't given the chance to ask him question at all.
But everybody there was overwhelmed. Wow, with Barack Obama, my hero, my rock star president. And so, because we were clouded by the celebrity of Barack Obama, we didn't ask the pertinent questions.
So in the end, I mean, at least for the current situation right now, to push for greater media freedom, it comes to the individual journalists themselves to
Yes.
ask more critical questions
Yes.
to these authorities.
Yes, I'm very proud to note that that the younger batch of journalists that are coming out have a very low tolerance for
Mediocrity.
mediocrity. No, not say mediocrity, for curtailing the press. I mean, we saw what happened after the heat was suspended. This group of young reporters, people with only 2-3 years experience, were coming out and making their voices heard. They were protesting in the streets, they had this Gerakan Pencil Merah, I think,
Pencil
the Red
Merah.
Pencil movement. Yeah, I mean, it's a very good effort to show that the future of journalism in this country is in good hands, because we've got. I don't know whether I can say this on air, but the younger batch of journalists have balls. You got to pick me up. I understand, but. And we need this kind of not aggression, aggressiveness, to tell the government that, look, we're not going to stand for this nonsense anymore. You want to promote a free press, go. You should do it without any of this so-called cosmetic efforts with the PPPA and all that. Remove the shackles of PPPA, and reporters should be and news organizations should be responsible enough to be able to regulate itself. If you know something is not, if you wrote something, if you know that you wrote something which is untrue, you should go ahead and make amends. I mean, I'm the recipient of 3 legal suits.
I see.
I just won one last week, defamation case. Okay, I'm going for trial for the second one next week. It's a mid-trial, and then I have another one which is in case management. I have 2 more in case management, actually. So I know what it's like to be questioned on the quality of your work. I know what it's like to be grilled and to be told that you're not professional enough, and that you don't abide by your own standards of journalism, and it hurts. But it's also a wake-up call that we continue to improve ourselves.
I guess the future of media freedom is definitely an optimistic one. Anyway, thank you, Terence.
Oh, yeah, done.
Fernandez.
Okay, that was all right.
Yeah, thank you, listeners, for listening to Durian ASEAN.